fruit, and welcome to this beautiful ancient woodland that I'm well blessed enough to have around 10 minutes walk away from my house. Now we've come here this afternoon because I'd like to talk to you about one of our most beloved flowering plants. Now this particular plant has gone by several different names over the years, including two of my favourites, which are Cuckoo's Boots and Witch's Thimble, but we know it best as the beautiful native British Bluebell. So, the bluebell, the beautiful flowering plant that we see in our woodland and our woodland edges and along our roadsides, flowering from around April all the way through into May. This is a plant that is dormant for most of the year. It grows from bulbs, and in a woodland like this one there can be millions and millions of them. They flower at this time of the year because they're taking advantage of the last of the sunlight before these trees above us start to put on their full canopy and throw the ground into total shade. So before that happens, the bluebell bulbs will send up their leaves and their flowers. Now, in Britain, we account for around 50% of the world's bluebell population. So the main concentration is here in our country, which makes them fairly rare the rest of the world round. But the bluebell has a problem. It's in competition with the Spanish bluebell. Our Victorian forefathers loved to explore, they loved to travel the world, and when they did that, they liked to bring back with them the animal species and the plant species that they found around the globe. And our native British bluebell is now in competition with the Spanish bluebell, brought back, as I say, by the Victorians. Now those Victorians brought Spanish bluebell back to our country to use in their own gardens. But as with lots of plant species from around that time, they jumped over the garden wall and found their way into our natural and wild spaces. The difficulty there being many of those species are invasive, and they're particularly aggressive and vigorous when they come up against our native plants. At first glance, native and Spanish bluebells can easily be dismissed as being the same, but a closer look reveals some easy to spot differences that will let you distinguish between the two easily. Our native bluebells have narrow leaves. They're about 1 to 1.5 centimetres wide, whereas the Spanish bluebell have much broader leaves that are about 3 centimetres wide. The native bluebell is a deep violet blue, and sometimes we have them in white. The flower is narrow and it's a tubular bell shape with tips that curl back on themselves, whereas the Spanish bluebell is a paler blue, often white or pink, with conical bell flowers with spreading and open tips. The native bluebell flowers on just one side of its stem, whereas the Spanish variety flowers all the way around the stem. A British bluebell has a distinctly drooping stem, while the Spanish bluebell sits on an upright stem. The native British bluebell has a sweet scent, while the Spanish one has no scent at all. And the British bluebell carries a cream-coloured pollen inside the flower head, whereas the pollen inside the Spanish bluebell is blue or a pale green colour. So, from those descriptions we can see that unusually this woodland at least contains native British bluebells. And I say unusually because they are becoming rarer. So rare in fact that they are now protected by law under the Countryside Act. It's illegal for us to dig up the bulbs, it's illegal for us to even pick the flowers, and it's illegal for us to deliberately harm these plants in any way, and that would include walking on them, because by crushing the leaves you can cause years worth of damage as the plant attempts to recover, because the crushed leaves won't enable it to photosynthesize. So, we were on our way home from that beautiful woodland, and unusually while we were there, we hadn't seen a single Spanish bluebell. They were all British bluebells, which is really, really rare these days. And lo and behold, here we are, right next to the M6 motorway. You can probably hear all the trucks rushing by. And here, down below, we have that Spanish bluebell. And based on the differences between the two that we were describing earlier, you can see the difference between the two. See how much wider the leaves are on the Spanish bluebell, around 3 centimetres wide as opposed to 1.5 centimetres. Do you see how the flowers are not as slim as the British bluebell? They're wider and they're all the way around the stem rather than just on one side. And again, the British bluebell droops, whereas its Spanish counterpart stands upright in that way. Part of the problem that we're having with the Spanish bluebell and the British bluebell coming into contact with one another is that they are hybridizing, they're mixing, which means the genetic qualities of this plant and of the British bluebell are becoming diluted as they form their own species. Both plant is beautiful in its own right, but it would be great if we could keep them separate. And so to that end, if you've got a shady part to your garden, you could do a lot worse than plant some native British bluebells in that area. And they'll give you a lot of pleasure through April and May every year.